So welcome to Tripod, our travel retail themed video podcast series in association with the Seva Group. I'm Martin Moodie.
I'm Roger Jackson.
Hi, Roger. Lovely to be back with you. And we've got a great guest on the program today. As you'll note, Roger, I'm now wearing the new Tripod baseball cap. Yours, I hate to say it, still in the mail, but what do you make of it? I think it's proving that Tripod is here to stay.
I know. I was going to say we've got our own merchandise line now, so yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Now, what do you make of the state of the nation with regard to travel retail, Roger? I've just come back from something like 90 days on the road through 11 countries and 14 airports. I've seen a lot. I've seen the good and I've seen the bad, and occasionally in Europe, I've seen the ugly. But overall, I think from a pure travel retail point of view, I'm very, very optimistic. Things seem to be bouncing back strongly in most locations. What's your take on it?
I think I've like yourself, I've travelled quite a bit within the Middle East and within Europe over the last 12 weeks. And I think visually, optically, if you want to say, I've seen business back, whether it's been duty-free stores, Dubai duty-free stores, Qatar duty-free, Heinemann. You know, I've seen a good mixture of the stores, Lagardère, and you can see shoppers are back and you see their spending as well. So just visually. Then when you couple that with duty-free's results 3 days ago,
yeah.
I think if you take out Asia out of their results, which I think we all accept, Asia is slower than the rest of the world because obviously of lockdowns, open to travel is just not there, and hopefully that'll come soon. I know, as you've experienced yourself, Hong Kong relaxed, which I'm sure is going to help, but still, 7 days, even though 3 of those can be at home, is still a challenge. But when those relax even further, I'm sure we're going to see Asia come back as soon as those rules relax. So I think if you strip out Asia out of duty-free's results, and I'm using duty-free because they're the largest duty-free retailer we have, and also the news is only 3 days old. I think when you strip that out, they're nearly back. They're nearly at 90% of revenue for the area of businesses excluding Asia. I think it's between 85 and 90% for all of those locations. And I think when you look at that, that is really good news, because duty-free's got a very wide geography. So excluding Asia, as I've already said, I think we're in a really good place to say business is back. Most of the contacts I have in the Middle East and Europe outside of duty-free are saying the exact same thing. In fact, in the Middle East, most of them are back. I saw the column reported from Dubai duty-free a few weeks ago himself that they were expecting to hit between 1.6 and 1.7 billion dollars versus 2 billion or just over 2 billion in 2019. So another one of our big retailers also showing that they're not far off being back, that sort of 85 to 90%. So I think as long as, we don't have any further issues with COVID around variants, etc., I think we're looking good for a return. And actually, I think most people are seeing that this year, which versus where we'd forecasted this, I don't think there was many people saying 2023, 2024 at the earliest. And it looks like actually 2022 could virtually be there for most retailers. So Martin, from my perspective, very positive. There are some challenges on the way, as in when does Asia come back? We have huge availability challenges and out of stocks in store because, as we know, there's a global crisis on raw materials, freight. We have recession looming in most countries and big inflation. So we have got some hurdles to come, but as in terms of getting people back into airports and back shopping for our industry, I think we're looking really positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pick up on Asia, something very significant happening here today. It's the 12th of August as we're recording this, and the 12th of August is the day that China Duty Free Group's parent company, China Tourism Group Duty Free Corp Limited, kickstarted their secondary listing on the stock exchange of Hong Kong. So this is a red letter day for CDFG. And the fact that they have gone ahead with that, Roger, having been thwarted in their ambition to have a secondary listing last December because conditions were inclement, to say the least. The fact that they've chosen now is another sign of confidence in the market. Now, perversely, on a short-term basis, Hainan shut down as we speak because of an outbreak in Sanya. But put that to one side, and the Chinese will deal with that quickly. This secondary listing, the fact that it's up and running, that tells you that China Duty Free Group is confident of raising very significant money, something like $2.2 billion, and that they have plans of what to do with it, more importantly. So a good sign that, that the industry number one is going up to a whole new level going forward. So we'll watch that space pretty carefully, Roger, and see what happens. But big moments in the travel retail industry here in Hong Kong today. So, Roger, we've got a very interesting guest from an industry that you know so well, the wines and spirits industry, an independent family winemaker with a quite extraordinary story. Shall we bring him in?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Tripod's special guest this week is Stephen Cronk, a man who sold his London house to pursue an unlikely, well, make that crazy dream of creating a wine brand in the south of France. Out the window went the constraints, the frustrations, but also the security of corporate life in England. Goodbye, London suburbia. Hello, the glorious landscapes and sunshine of Provence in France. Now, if that all sounds like an episode from TV series A Place in the Sun, in which Brits swap the gloom of home for the color, the charm, and the cuisine of Mediterranean Europe, I suppose it really does sound like one. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a fanciful foreign sojourn. From the very start, Stephen and his wife, Jeannie, determined to create a high quality, successful wine brand. Easier said than done. They called it Mirabeau en Provence. And what has happened, I think in the intervening 13 years, 13, is one of the most extraordinary entrepreneurial tales you will ever hear. And today, Mirabeau is a stunning success story. It's the best-selling Provence rosé brand in the UK. It's available in over 15 countries. In Australia and the Netherlands, it also ranks among the top 3 in its categories. And it's now pushing very hard, I'm glad to say, into travel retail. And the Mirabeau story is no longer solely about rosé wine. Just over 2 years ago, the company launched a gin under the Mirabeau name, a serious dry rosé gin that is not a sweet pink gin. And already it's seriously successful too, having been rolled out across more than 50 markets. Ladies and gentlemen, what a story this is. Stephen Cronk, welcome to Tripod.
Wow, thank you very much for having me, and what an introduction. I hardly recognize that as being me, but thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Great to have you with us. Well, Stephen, we're going to wind back to the very beginning, before Mirabeau was even conceived, and I'm going to pass over to my younger and much better looking co-host, Roger Jackson.
Hi, Stephen. Great to meet you.
Hi, Roger.
We always go back to the beginning. So I guess from what we'd really like to know is early days, where you grew up, education, what sort of influenced you in those really early days?
Yeah, so I guess everyone thinks their upbringing is rather mundane and banal, but mine, yeah, I grew up in South London. I went to school in West Sussex. I was sent away to a typical British boarding school, which is actually a beautiful place, and I've just sent my son there because he's uneducatable in France, unfortunately. Yeah, so grew up in South London. Went to what was Brighton Poly. It's now the University of Brighton, which sounds much better. Yeah, it was a regular middle class upbringing in the south of London.
And I guess what started your love of wine? Where did that start? And I guess where did rosé feature on that discovery?
Yeah, it's interesting because my family weren't wine drinkers. I actually discovered wine in my gap year. After school, I went to Australia, as a lot of kids did in those days. And on the way back from Australia, well, I hitchhiked from Sydney to Adelaide, and went camping around the Barossa Valley and rented a bike because that's all I could afford to do, really. And I just became captivated by the beautiful undulating hills of the Barossa Valley, of the uniformity of the vines. I thought the whole place was so utterly compelling. And then, of course, the product I also fell in love with as well. And so that's what really made me think, okay, change of direction, because I was going to go to study hotel management at Poly, and decided to go straight into business instead. But knowing, and I was very lucky that I knew with such certainty and clarity that I wanted to go into wine. So did my degree, excuse me, in Brighton, and started in the London wine trade as a van driver, which is pretty crazy considering my driving skills. And worked for a very small wine shipper called Michael Morgan Limited. And in fact, John Morgan, the brother of Michael, would later be a huge influence in getting me back into the wine trade. Did my wine exam. So when I passed my higher certificate, they basically gave me a business card and said, okay, you can now go in the front door of the restaurants and start selling. That was my sales training. Off I went into the wine trade.
And then telecoms came. How did that come about, from obviously falling in love with wine in Australia, working in wine, and then coming over to telecoms, which is a bit different?
Yeah, so basically, with the arrogance of youth, age 24, I thought I could do a better job myself than my previous employers. So I decided to set up my own wine company, Stephen Cronk Fine Wines, beautiful name, in Southwest London, in Wandsworth. And by the time I was 30, I had, let's put it this way, I'd learned a lot about entrepreneurship and running a business, made quite a few mistakes, and decided to get out of that and pay off the debts. So at that stage, which was 1994, telecoms was booming in the UK. It was just really getting going. They broke up the duopoly of BT and Mercurian. And there was a job going whereby they wanted somebody who could sell, who hadn't come from a telecoms background, and I got a job. And so it was very opportune, actually, and very timely that I did that, age 30, for several reasons. I think the corporate world gave me a lot of discipline around business. And it really helped me understand the psychology of working in the corporate world and the way that people operate and the politics of the corporate world. Because later on, I was to obviously face into the corporate world with my own little wine brand. And I think it really gave me some insights as to the pressures on buyers, how decisions are made, the politics, and so on. So I went into telecoms initially because to do something else and to pay off the debts, like I said. But actually, I met my wife, or my future wife, as she was to become there. She was in the marketing department, and I was the sales guy. And she couldn't believe I spent most of my time on the golf course. But that's how business was done then. About 3 months after meeting her, I proposed to her, and she daftly accepted. And funnily enough, we got married here, where I am now in Bavaria, a year later. And then something happens. Lots of pivot points when you look back and you realize, wow, that's interesting that happened. But soon after we got married, I went hiking in southwest France with some friends of mine, and we were in the foothills of the Pyrenees, and we were walking around a vineyard, and I was ogling this vineyard. I really missed the wine trade. I just love being in close proximity to vineyards. And I was walking around this vineyard with these two friends of mine, and they were very nosy friends. In fact, they were from Hong Kong. He was a professor at Hong Kong University, and he's a very nosy guy. And he said, "Stephen, so how much have you just paid for your London house?" And I told him, and he thought that was a ridiculous amount of money. But he said, this vineyard that you've been ogling at for the last 2 hours is on the market for the same price as your London house. I thought, wow, okay, so in theory, if I could pay off my mortgage, I could buy this vineyard or a vineyard like that. And that was the trigger that made me think, okay, I'm in telecoms, I missed the wine trade. Telecoms is better paid than the wine trade. If I could pay off the mortgage and sell the house and buy a vineyard, then that's what I want to do. So I came back with the idea. It was met with stone cold silence and disbelief. But because this wasn't going to happen overnight, and I have lots of ideas, Jeannie, my wife, sort of let me have it, and then we started having a family, and it seemed to dissipate to some extent. But I kept the idea kept burning away, and I have this very important thing, which is I call socializing an idea. So as an entrepreneur, if you have an idea, you have to put it up in front of friends or people you know who'll challenge it. And so I had lots of time to do that, and it was certainly challenged. And there are lots of horror stories about people who thought they could go and have a vineyard and so on. And there's a very famous expression that I'm sure you both know, which is you can make a small fortune in the wine trade if you start with a large one. Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of warning signs. And so it took me 10 years, and we always wanted to have a family. So we got the children born, and the idea was still there. And that's where it came from. And eventually I paid off the mortgage, and we sold the house and moved to the south of France.
Wow, what a story, and what a brave couple you were, because we talked about the constraints and frustrations of corporate life, don't we? But you also bring other things, other important things, especially when you're parents, comfort and security and pensions and all that kind of nice stuff. But you did it. This idea had simmered away for a decade, and then you headed down there. Now, for people who are watching this program, Stephen, who will know the brand and see it as the very real success it is today, they won't know about those early formative days. They don't tend to, because you don't tell people. They're the hard yards, as I always describe them, of creating a business from scratch. And it's not easy. It's not easy creating a business, keeping it going, sustaining it, let alone making it into a big success. Tell us about those early formative days, the initial vision, and how you set about doing it, and what were the biggest challenges that you faced?
Yeah, it was tough, and you're right. I mean, people often look at the success later on and assume it was fairly straightforward, and it wasn't. And also, this was a high risk venture, as you know. We'd never done this before. We didn't speak any French. We'd never made wine. We'd never built a brand, and so I mean that's why I'm pleased that we had managed to pay off the mortgage, because that was my funding. I think nobody would have backed me with that track record or lack of track record in that area. And I felt a huge pressure, a huge weight on my shoulders to deliver. So my wife, we had, when we moved into our last house in London, it was the best house. It was in Teddington, a leafy suburb, southwest London, close to a beautiful park, close to the train station. And when we moved in, we said we never need to move house again. We can stay here until we retire. And then we opened a bottle of rosé wine to celebrate after moving into our new house. And it's like, oh yeah, that hasn't gone away, has it? And sure enough, 3 years later, we'd sold the house and gone to Provence with this idea. And it was really tough, because we'd taken our children out of school, we'd moved away from our network, from our culture, from our language, I had this idea that I could, once I'm there, because also you can't actually understand what's involved until you move out there. You have to make that commitment. And actually, my wife said, why don't we just rent? No, I said, sorry, why don't we rent the house out in case this all goes horribly wrong? And she said, no, 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 no. There ain't no going back. This is going to work. It has to work. And so she took a huge leap of faith as well. She had big trust in me, but I felt that pressure massively on my shoulders. And in fact, we got helped out. We met, so John Morgan, my head of sales, when my first job at Michael Morgan Limited, I mentioned earlier, he introduced me to an American guy called Tom Bove, who had just sold Chateau Miraval to Brad and Angelina. And he really helped set us up. So he introduced me to his winemaker, but also he helped us in the early days establish ourselves in France, because initially we thought we would move from London to Aix-en-Provence, because it's a city and we could put our children into international schools because they didn't speak any French. And then I met this guy, Tom Bove. He said, you're doing it all wrong. You know, if you send your children to international schools, they'll gravitate towards the other English-speaking children. You'll gravitate towards their parents. That those parents will then move on because they will have only been there for 2 or 3 years and be rotating around the world, and you won't settle in. You won't integrate. Find a French village with a French school, throw them in the deep end. And he helped us find the school, and he really settled us in. And actually, he said, "Your children, it's tough love, and your children might cry for the first year, but they'll thank you for the rest of their lives." And I thought, okay, that sounds pretty tough, but actually, that's what we did. And it did take a while for them to settle in, but they were 7. My eldest 2 were 7 and 8 at the time, but they settled into school within 6 months. My wife was doing all the homework with them in French, and I basically started to search out the best terroir in Provence. So I knew that I knew that I'd have to work as a négociant, in other words, working with growers around the region. And I thought, let's go and find out the best growers in the best terroir and start to pull together our initial blends. And that's how we got going.
And when was the first vintage, Stephen?
The first vintage was 2010, and I took it to I took it into Waitrose at Christmas 2010. My winemaker, Angela Muir, who's a British master of wine, who was an amazing influence in our lives. She basically, I started doing films with her, and she said, "Who's going to make your wine, Stephen?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to give it a go." Because initially it's blending, working with other growers. And she said, "Stephen, you know nothing about wine, really, do you, darling? Why don't I come and help you?" I said, "Angela, I can't afford you." I knew her day rate. I thought, there's no way I can afford you. She said, "I'm not asking to be paid. Just pay my flights and I'll come and sort you out." And that was amazing. And that's what I think people along this journey, I've noticed, because they've seen how nuts this whole venture is and how committed we were, and we still are to making this work. People have been so helpful. People will go out of their way if they see that you're sincere, it's thought through, and you're committed to making this work. And she became our winemaker, if you like, for the first few years. And I took the wine into Waitrose in Christmas 2010. And the buyer there, who's now a friend, but at the time he was quite scary, because any buyers watching this, you've got no idea the influence you have on the businesses like ours. And he said, "Stephen, okay, I've got hundreds of other Provence brands who want me to take them. Why should I take your brand over anybody else's?" And I just read a book on social media marketing. And I thought I knew my stuff. And I said, "Because, Nick, I'll make sure this wine flies off your shelves. I'll be using social media to build my brand, and it'll really work for you." And he said, "Stephen, I don't really believe you, but I'll give you a go, and I'll list you in 60 of my 300 stores. And I'm going to put you on the bottom shelf, though. Bottom shelf, because that's where I normally exit brands. And if your social media marketing really works, then people will discover it, won't they?" I said, yeah, I hope so. So that's what happened. So we started on the bottom shelf, and now I think we have 6 SKUs in Waitrose. We're in all the stores, and we've been working with them for 12 vintages now.
Can you remember your feeling the day you walked out of that office? Did you leap in the air to 10 foot high?
Yeah, I did. I managed to. I mean, literally. I mean, not quite 10 foot, but I managed to contain myself whilst walking out of reception. You know, handed in my thingy collar thing, and signed myself out. Walked out and just rah! I mean, I was hoping there's no closed circuit TV, and they would think that I was some demented loon. But yeah, I was in such a high. It was, and it was an amazing break. And you know, Waitrose, you know, they talk about working with small growers, small producers, and they really do. And they, you know, the influence they had on our lives as a result of that decision was immense. But I kept to my word, and you know, I knew I had to make my wine perform in the way that I know I had to make my gin perform. You know, I can't just make a great product and have it sit on the shelf and not sell. You know, and I always believe that sort of the marketing sells the first bottle and the liquid sells the second bottle. It's, you know, a lot of people talk about that, but it's true. You know, I had to act like a big brand, even though I was a tiny brand.
Yeah, interesting lesson. And so there you were, a really breakthrough order. We roll forward to the scenario that I mentioned at the start. You're now a very big international brand. What happened in the middle? I mean, that's a 13-year journey, and I'm going to ask you to sum it up in a couple of minutes, Stephen. But how did you go to being this really, I would say, blockbuster success, made all the more remarkable, I must say, by the fact that you were down in the south of France as an Englishman, surrounded by French winemakers. So I'd also like you to dwell on that. How much of a challenge was that?
Yeah, I think on that side, to deal with that bit first, I think that the producers I was working with just thought I was amusing and it would never work. And then I kept coming back and making more wine each year, and they just say, okay, this is working. And so those relationships I have with the growers is really important, because you know, I'm you know, especially now with some of the big players like Aviation and Pernod Ricard moving into the area, those relationships are going to remain important. So I think that they amuse themselves by dealing with me, and now it's working. But no, I think it was really useful that I was a salesman. And I think a lot of people, certainly I felt when I started selling telecoms, that it was a bit of a dirty word, and you know, what skills you need to sell. But my gosh, if you can't sell, then you know, you haven't got a business. And we, you know, as we all know, we're all selling all the time. You know, even if we're not in sales, you know, if you're an accountant, you go for a job interview, you're selling yourself. So I had to basically, you know, once I got into Waitrose, I knew that I had to go and get other markets. So we started just picking up the phone, and that was another good discipline that I'd learned from the early days, is cold calling. You know, it's something that most of us, we talk about in the days when you had to pick up a phone, you know, a dialy phone. The phone was really heavy. It's amazing how clean your study would get when you knew you had to make a phone call you didn't want to make, and suddenly you find all those things you're suddenly hoovering like a loon because you don't want to make those phone calls. But that background in sales was really useful, and so I started to find other Waitrose lookalikes in different countries and say, look, Waitrose have taken it, it's working there. How about you take my wine and I'll make it work for you as well. But I think the social media angle was really good at that time, because this is obviously in the early 2010, 2011, you know, social media, Instagram didn't exist. Social media was really just beginning, but I was really keen to use that to try and build a following. And, you know, people believe that, and they like the story that, you know, a small brand could have, like I said earlier, act a bit like a big brand and actually get the name out there. So they believed it. So, you know, eventually we were, you know, 3 or 4 countries, and I started collecting countries. I thought, wow, we've got 20 countries now, and I think now we're in close to 60 countries around the world. And it's just been a huge amount of fun, and you know, I love the fact that people believe me and they trust the liquid. And at the end of the day, you know, it's all about the liquid, and you know, that's what people are buying.
Stephen, 2 more from me, I guess, pretty quick ones, really. But you mentioned quite a few mentors, influencers, friends. So who would you say were the key ones? And also, secondly, I guess one that is just coming off the cuff from hearing you. were there any moments where you thought this isn't going to work? You'd already gone in, you'd sold your house, all your money and your family's money was invested. Was there a couple of points where you're like, this isn't going to work, or we're going to have to change? And I guess I'm asking that as a business owner myself.
Yes, there were lots of points where we thought I thought this has all gone wrong, and there still are moments where things don't go right, and you know we will all know those moments when you think, oh my God, my life is so terrible, and how could I have gotten here, and how do I get out of this? And I think it was really good that actually we had sold the house in London. We had no going back. You know, we really had to make it work. So, and I think one of the characteristics that I think we don't talk enough about is resilience. Yeah, and that's something that I'm keen to teach my kids, and they've seen us. My wife's now very involved in the business, and they see how hard we work, and they've seen the setbacks, and the ability to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and do it again is really, really key. But this, I think as you both know, entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted, and it's not for everybody. I think entrepreneurship is over romanticized.
Yeah.
It's tough. Yes, it's nice to be your own boss sometimes, but my gosh, it'd be nice to have someone telling me what to do rather than me having to figure it out. And now we've got 30 plus people in the business. I'm their boss, and I've got all the stresses on me. And I've got a big paychecks to write out every month. So it's huge pressure and really not for everybody. But I love it. It suits me. And I used to have bosses who couldn't stand me working for them because I would think I could do it better. So it was for me, but not for everybody. But I had when I started this journey, I had 3 people who really influenced me. One of them is an advertising legend in the UK called Sir John Hegarty, who I think was one of the founding partners with the Saatchi brothers, but then had Vogelbach Hegarty, and he was famous for some really classic, iconic ads in the 80s. And he actually bought a vineyard, I think about 15 years ago or so in Southwest France. And he actually did a talk to the Institute of Masters of Wine in Bordeaux, and Jancis Robinson introduced him, and this guy came on stage and was talking to a couple of hundred masters of wine, and he really shook them up. And he said, you guys speak a language which is incomprehensible to anybody outside of your industry. You're talking to yourselves. You need to talk to other people. If you want to make wine an accessible product, say things that people will understand and can relate to, and start to entertain. It's not just about education, it's about entertainment. I thought that's so true. And that's one of the lovely things about rosé wine, is it's not a snobby wine, it's quite a democratic wine. A lot of, we don't talk about terroir much or grape varieties much in terroir wine. It's about, in rosé wine, it's about how that wine makes you feel. It's about where it transports you. It's from one of the most beautiful, iconic regions in the world, Provence. So the wine transports you there, and you either relive memories of your time in Saint-Tropez or your holidays in the sun. And anyway, it's something that's really evocative. So he really helped me out. And then I read 2 other books. There was a book, I read 2 books that really helped. And one was called Crush It by a guy called Gary Vaynerchuk. And if you look up Gary Vaynerchuk, he's one of the noisiest, infuriating people in the world. But my God, he speaks some sense. And I've actually met Sir John Hegarty and Gary since then, because I wanted to, a few years after I had some success, I wanted to thank them for the influence that they'd given me. And they were like, who is this guy? And actually, because Gary Vaynerchuk is now got VaynerMedia, I think it's called, but he started a wine store in Brooklyn, I think it was, certainly in New York, around New York. And he started interviewing celebrities about wine. He became, just an amazing character called, and he had a TV show. I think he recorded something every day. Anyway, I went to meet him, and when I actually had to reach out to him initially, I sent him a video and just to say, Gary, here's my family, and we're here and succeeding largely because of you. And he wrote back saying, you've just made me cry. So anyway, so he was a massive influence, and his book was about how you can turn a passion into a business using social media. And then the final guy was a huge influence, is an American marketing guru called Seth Godin, who wrote a book called Tribes. And he basically said, if you can build a tribe of followers, you don't need to have millions. You just need to have initially a few dozen, then a few hundred. And if they really believe in Mirabeau, then they'll introduce it to their friends and they'll remember the story. And that's how to build a business. So those were the three big influences early on in the Mirabeau journey.
And I guess before Martin probably takes you over to our desert island, one last question, travel retail. So where are you at the moment and what are your ambitions? It'd be great to understand what your plans are for our amazing industry.
Yeah, no, travel retail really excites us, and I'm really hoping. So we're trying to get in with Dufry or Lagardère to try and get into if you like, our gin into the local hotspots for us as a business. So I'd love to get Nice duty free, and that'd be my dream, is to be able to walk through and see my gin there, and then also in the UK airports, that would be amazing. So I've taken on a sales guy who has got a background in travel retail. So I'm hoping that we can work through Mathieu Van Haal's contacts and eventually crack the travel retail market. It's a tough market, and for small brands, it's really it's a real challenge. But I'm determined to get in there, and it's amazing. Obviously, showcase for any brand, and I think it would really. Yeah, I mean, because we're also trying to create a product that doesn't really exist right now. Martin, as you introduced it earlier, it's a rosé gin. So it's a dry gin infused with the herbs of Provence, made of grapes, not from grain, and because it's bone dry, it's not a pink gin. So it's a different category, and certainly being in travel retail would really help.
Right. Well, we wish you luck in that, and hopefully some of those buyers are tuning in, Stephen, and we'll be impressed by what you're telling them, because I think your emphasis on product quality right from the get-go stands out to me. And I've tasted an amount of your product, and I can certainly testify to that quality and the innovation you bring in marketing around it, social media marketing in particular. Which brings me in a nice kind of segue. Before we go to our desert island, I've got to ask you about a famous video you made, Steve. That was a rather unusual way of opening a bottle of wine with a cork, of course, when you don't have that most indispensable of elements, the corkscrew. So what's the Stephen Cronk way to get around that situation, and how did you tell the world about it?
Well, yeah, that's quite a story, as you know. So when I started my social media journey, I was doing YouTube videos. I was trying to explain the world of wine to people. Why does a sommelier give you the cork, and what are you meant to do with that little bit of wine in the glass, and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to really demystify wine. And then I started making some more fun videos, and my 220-second video was how to open a bottle of wine if you've forgotten a corkscrew. And because there's a technique you can use where you put the wine bottle, turn it sideways, put it into a shoe, and bang it against the wall. And I tried it, and it worked. So I decided to have a shave and get the tripod out and give it a whirl. And I edited it into 50 seconds because I knew that these things, to be shareable, had to be short. And I thought, if I can get this past 60,000 followers was my record for any video. And that was because for some reason, because you can tell with Google Analytics who's looking at your videos, and one particular video I did on Provence olive oil was being viewed by Greek males over 65. I thought, that's not my target market. So I thought, okay, but the 60,000 views, that's my target. And within a week, I had 1 million views, and it subsequently had, on YouTube, it's had 12 million views, but globally, it's had over 100 million views.
Have you ever been in this position? Really nice bottle of wine, no corkscrew. How do you open it? I'll show you. First of all, take the capsule off. Voila. Secondly, you need a pair of shoes. Just one will do. Bottle of wine, a shoe and a wall. Place bottle in shoe and start banging. Cork begins to pop up. Do the rest by hand. Et voila.
And I've even had a business school got their students to do a huge piece of work on why it was so popular. And I think it's because a lot of people have been in that situation. We got a bottle of wine, we've got a bit of a thirst on, but no corkscrew. So rather than sort of trying to jab the toothbrush into it or something like that, this is a fun way of doing it. And it just went viral, and it's been a huge amount of fun.
That's fantastic. I've got a confession, Stephen. When I was in hotel quarantine in Hong Kong last week, I bought some wine at Bangkok airport, and going through this crazy process of clearing all the medical checks and all the formalities in Hong Kong, getting tested, etc. at Hong Kong airport, I left all my wine, which was all screw cap, in the airport. Very sad, very sad. When I got to this dreadful, dreary hotel room, of course, I remembered I had a bottle in my suitcase. It was a 1997 Amarone from Massey, a really great Italian house, a really great wine. But of course, it has a cork. And in a hotel quarantine room, there ain't no corkscrews. So I thought there was not. So I was about to tune into YouTube and be saved by Stephen Cronk when I actually did take time out to ring reception. I didn't think they'd bring anything up to the room, given the quarantine regulations, but they did bring the corkscrew. I still wonder if I'd opened it with the Stephen Cronk technique, if we would have had 1997 Amarone all over the carpet in my quarantine room or not. But you seem to do it very, very strictly.
Yeah, no, it can go horribly wrong, and so it's always better off with a corkscrew if you can find one.
All right, okay. Well, from there, Roger, I'm going to hand over to you, and I think it's time to go to our desert island, where we take, Stephen, all our guests on the program. We give them a few creature comforts to while the time away. So over to you, Roger.
Stephen, welcome to the Des Island. So after the grilling you've just had, now it's a bit of peace. I guess the first question is, what choice of music would you bring to the island? Can be one track or an album, your choice.
Okay, so I've thought about this, and one of my favorite tracks ever is While My Guitar Gently Weeps by the Beatles. But there's a version that I implore you to look at on YouTube with Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, Steve Winwood, and Prince. And the song was written by George Harrison, and what's the son called Danny Harrison is on stage playing the guitar, and Prince does a guitar solo in the middle of this song, and he plays two tricks. And Danny, who's the son of George Harrison, you just see his face light up when Prince does his trick. So one of the best guitar solos, some lovely trickery from one of the best artists in the world, Prince, an amazing song. So check it out on YouTube; it's brilliant.
I will do. I definitely will do. Looking forward to it. You've got your music. What would you take to read? Can be anything, a book, a poem, play, your choice. What would you have to read on the island? So
actually, for me, there's a book I've read in the last 2 years called From Dirt to Soil by an American farmer called Brown. And it talks about regenerative farming. And that book inspired me to create the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation. And it's really explained the importance of soil in dealing with biodiversity and climate change and the impact that soil can make on the planet. So it's inspired me to understand that science and photosynthesis can store carbon from the air into the soil, and it's changed my life. And I'm trying to change the way that people farm vines around the world.
Amazing. Looks like I need to look that one up as well.
Yes.
And then the next question is probably going to be a little bit difficult for you, but if we, it's got duty-free status, this island, of course. So you're allowed one duty-free product. I think for you, we'll give you two, because I think one's going to be one of your own products. So perhaps if you could tell us which one of your own products you take, and then if I can push you to pick another one, it can be anything in duty-free, but if you could give us two, one of your own and something else, that would be great.
So yeah, my aim would have to be my gin, because you can just, when you haven't got any mixers, you can just chill it and squeeze a lemon and you've got a great martini. It's that good. You can drink it just neat without any vermouth. And obviously, when you do have tonic, you can just have a huge variety of drinks, including my favorite Negroni. But apart from my own product, obviously, because this is not massively about self-promotion, it's probably be an Oban 14. I love a whiskey, but it doesn't need to be a hugely fancy one. But an Oban 14 is my go-to tipple when my wife's not watching.
Amazing distillery as well. It's obviously a Diageo distillery, and I worked at Diageo for 13 years, but if anybody wants to visit an amazing distillery, Oban and Cardew are my two favourites. A great distillery as well.
I've never been there. I really want to go there. I've never even been to a distillery in Scotland, and I think I need to do a tour. So maybe Roger, when you're next over here,
we'll arrange that. We'll do a switch. I'll come visit you, and you can we can arrange a visit for you there.
Sounds good.
Great. All right. On this island, you've been on your own for a while there, Stephen. So we've arranged to fly in some special guests. We're going to put together an amazing dinner party for you. I'm pretty sure what wine you'll be serving. Which three guests do you like from? They can be from history or they can be living today. What three guests and why?
So I'm afraid they're all British, but I love Stephen Fry, the British comedian, an actor and a writer, and he's just so ridiculously clever, but incredibly funny and self-effacing as well. Another British is the Scot Billy Connolly, who throughout the 80s I've seen him live, and I think the two of them would be amazing. But then to balance it out a bit and get somebody more contemporary and a woman, I'd invite Phoebe Waller-Bridge along. She's the writer of quite a few famous TV shows, including Fleabag, which is just ridiculously hilarious. And I just think that would be a really funny combo. We'd be drinking Mirbeau Rosé and having a laugh and watching the sun go down. I think it'd be amazing.
It'll be a great night. All right. Well, then, Stephen, just to wrap up, thanks for being such a good sport today, and for coming to our desert island. So you deserve a treat now. We're going to fly you and your family to anywhere on the world on Tripod Airlines. So very, very much a budget carrier. It's your holiday. Now, where would it be? Where would it be, and why?
Well, as long as I got a free baseball cap as part of my journey, and that would help me protect me from the sun. I think, because I have to say with some sincerity that one of the costs of being running a business like ours is not having spent much time with the children. And so I love the idea of going somewhere like the Maldives, where we can just and completely ban all electronic handhelds and iPods or whatever, and iPhones, and just spend some quality time snorkeling, eating, reading, drinking rosé, and trying to regain some of that lost time that I feel guilty about with my children. But that's what I'd love to do. I've never been to the Maldives. The pictures look amazing, and I think it'd be a lovely place if Tripod Air can get us there.
Tripod Air will be sending the tickets very soon to you, Stephen. Listen, it's been great to chat. Roger, I'm going to let you have the final word. What a brilliant story. this has been. Roger, you know the drinks industry better than just about anybody I know, and you've seen success stories and you've seen failures. What do you make of this one?
I think what Stephen and his family have achieved is just unbelievable. I think if you look at, there are lots of instances where people, get liquid, have a brand idea, try and sell it on to somebody, try and get a brand owner interested in day one, but still all on your own, from both finance, even the digital marketing, liquid, bottle, and to use your network like you have. It's just unbelievable. And I think you mentioned something around, people are too quick to, highlight, what entrepreneurs do and who they are. And unfortunately, as the three of us both know, it's a very, very lonely place. And at times a very, very hard place. And I think one of the challenges is everyone looks at success, but doesn't see the 10, 15 years of sleepless nights. So, Stephen, from my perspective, just huge congratulations to you and your family. It's an absolute, it's amazing hearing you talk about how you achieved this and the building blocks. And I'm sure we've only heard less than 1% of really what it took. But I think the story is fantastic. And I hope travel retail is going to be an amazing industry for your brand. I'm actually sure it will be. And I cannot wait to see it on the shelves of all of our amazing outlets.
Yeah, thank you so much. You make some very good points there, and it's still, I'm still excited about this business. I love my products. I love this industry, and it's a huge amount of fun. Better than telecoms.
All right, Stephen. Well, here in Hong Kong, it's about 4:30. So I think in about probably a couple of hours from now, I will sample a little bit of your product. I've got a bottle sitting there nicely chilling down in the fridge, and I'm going to watch the sunset in Hong Kong and toast you and your great success story and your wife's and your family's great success story. I think it's been tremendous, and you've been a terrific guest, Stephen Cronk. Take good care. May your business continue to flourish. May we see more Mirabeau, rosé and gin in travel retail. Here's to you. Take good care.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Roger. That was a great chat with a very interesting man indeed, and what a story. I thought you summed it up beautifully at the end in terms of those sleepless nights that all entrepreneurs go through and continue to go through even when they're successful. But what a journey Stephen Cronk's been on, and what a fine tale of family and independent success it is.
Yeah, huge. And I think most people would have sold out, brought somebody in. The fact that him and his family have persevered and built this amazing brand, I think just says everything about Stephen and his family and his wife and the risks they took. And as I said to Stephen at the end, I really am looking forward to seeing his brands all around travel retail when we all travel in the final quarter of this year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Roger, it's been great to be with you as always. We've got another great guest lined up for the next show, so we'll see everybody back in a little while. But for now, this is Martin Moodie saying see you next time.
See you next week.